She had stopped straightening his study 6 months before he noticed. The Duke of Ashworth was not a man who observed small things. He observed ledgers, land values, the precise angle of a cravat. He observed whether a horse favoured its left foreleg, whether a tenant's roof had been repaired, whether the wine at dinner had been decanted exactly 20 minutes before service. These things mattered. These things he could control. But the small things, the wilting roses the housekeeper replaced every 3rd day without being asked, the way the morning fire was always burning before he descended the stairs, the scent of lavender that clung to the corners of his library, these he had long stopped seeing. They were simply there, as constant as the ticking of the long case clock in the hall. He did not know that someone had chosen those roses, that someone had risen before dawn to ensure the fire caught on the first strike, that someone had pressed dried lavender into the seams of his favourite armchair because she had once heard him say, in an unguarded moment, that the scent helped him think. Her name was Clara, and she had loved him for 6 years, not the way a servant loves a master, grateful, distant, careful. She had loved him the way a woman loves a man she watches from across a room, the way a heart loves without permission, without hope, without ceasing. She had loved him in the quiet hours, when she brought him tea and he did not look up. She had loved him when he married another woman, and she had loved him still when that woman left him for a life he could not provide. She had loved him through grief, through silence, through the long years when he had turned inward and forgotten that the world outside his sorrow still breathed. And he had never once seen her. Not truly. Not the way she saw him. The morning it ended began like any other. Clara rose at 5:30, as she always did, and dressed in the dim light of her small room beneath the eaves. The window faced east, and she watched the sky pale from black to grey to the softest pink before she pinched out her candle and descended the back stairs. The house was silent. The servants' hall was empty. She lit the kitchen fire, filled the kettle, and cut 2 slices of bread from the loaf the cook had baked the night before. She did this without thinking, her hands moving with the practiced ease of 6 years' repetition. She had been 17 when she first arrived at Ashworth Hall. Her father had been the estate's steward, a quiet man who had taught her to read from his own books, who had told her that knowledge was the one thing no one could take from her. When he died, the Duke had allowed her to stay, not out of kindness, she later understood, but out of convenience. She knew the house, knew the accounts, knew the rhythms of the estate. It was simpler to keep her than to train someone new. So she had stayed. And she had watched. In the beginning, she had watched him the way anyone watches a man who holds their fate in his hands, warily, attentively, with a careful eye to his moods. He was not cruel. He was not kind. He was simply absent, moving through the halls of his own house like a man who had forgotten he lived there. His wife had left him 2 years before Clara arrived, and the wound of it had never healed. He did not speak of her. He did not speak of much at all. But Clara watched and she learned. She learned that he drank his tea black with 1 sugar, that he preferred his eggs poached but would never complain if they were scrambled, that he read until the small hours of the morning and often fell asleep in his chair with the book still open on his chest. She learned that he had a laugh he never used, a smile that flickered only when he was alone with his horses, a voice that could be warm when he forgot to guard it. She learned to love him before she understood what she was doing, and she had spent the 6 years since then learning to hide it. The kettle began to whistle. Clara poured the water into the teapot, arranged the cup and saucer on the silver tray, and carried it up the main staircase. The house was still dark, the curtains drawn, the portraits on the walls watching her pass with painted eyes that seemed to hold no judgment. She had walked this path 10,000 times. She knew which stairs creaked, which doors stuck, which floorboards sighed underfoot. She knew the house the way she knew her own heartbeat. She reached his study door and paused. This was the moment she had always allowed herself. 1 breath, 1 heartbeat, 1 small space of time in which she was not a servant, but a woman about to see the man she loved. She closed her eyes and let herself feel it, just for a second. The anticipation, the hope that lived beneath her ribs like a secret she would never tell. Then she opened the door. He was awake. That was the first surprise. He was standing by the window, already dressed, his back to her, his hands clasped behind him. The fire had not been lit. The room was cold. "Your Grace," she said softly, setting the tray on the corner of his desk. "I did not expect you to be risen so early." He did not answer. She waited. The silence stretched, thin and brittle like ice about to crack. She had grown accustomed to his silences. He was a man who lived inside himself, who spoke only when speech was necessary, who had long ago forgotten that words could also be gifts. But this silence was different. It had weight. It had intention. "Your Grace," she said again, and this time her voice was careful. "Is something amiss?" He turned. She had seen him angry before. She had seen him cold, dismissive, lost in grief. She had never seen him look at her the way he looked at her now, as though she were a stranger who had trespassed, as though her presence in his study were an offense he had only just discovered. "Miss Harrow," he said. That was all. Her name. But the way he spoke it made her feel as though he had struck her. "I would like to know," he said slowly, "the meaning of this." He held up a letter. She recognized it immediately, the cream-colored paper, the careful handwriting, the seal she had pressed with her own mother's ring. It was the letter she had written to her sister 6 months ago, the letter she had posted without thinking, the letter in which she had poured out her heart in words she had never spoken aloud, the letter in which she had confessed everything. Her breath stopped. Her hands went cold. "I found it among my correspondence," he said, and his voice was flat, measured, the voice of a man who was holding his anger on a short leash. "It was delivered to my desk by mistake. A servant who cannot read, I imagine, and who did not notice the name on the envelope." He took a step toward her. She did not move. "You speak of me in this letter," he said. "You speak of feelings that no servant should harbor for her master. You write of love, of devotion, of a hope you have carried for 6 years. His voice cracked on the last word, and she saw it. The betrayal in his eyes, the sense that she had stolen something from him, that she had crossed a line she should have known was there. "How dare you?" he whispered. The words landed like stones. Clara did not answer. She could not. Her throat had closed, and her heart was beating so loudly she could barely hear her own thoughts. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times. Not like this, not with anger, not with the cold contempt in his voice. She had imagined him learning the truth and being moved, being softened, being somehow grateful that someone had loved him through the years when he had been impossible to love. She had been a fool. "Miss Harrow," he said, and his voice was harder now, "I require an answer. Do you deny writing this?" She lifted her chin. She had learned that from him. The way he held himself when he was about to face something he did not wish to face. She had learned so many things from him, and he had never known. "No," she said. "I do not deny it." The silence that followed was absolute. He looked at her as though she had transformed into someone he did not recognize. Perhaps she had. Perhaps she had always been this woman, and he had simply never looked. "Then you must understand," he said, "that you cannot remain here." She had known he would say it. She had known from the moment she saw the letter in his hand. But knowing did not prepare her. Knowing did not stop the pain from blooming in her chest, sharp and hot and devastating. "Your Grace," she said, and her voice was steady, though she did not know how. "I have served this house for 6 years. I have never been late, never been dishonest, never failed in my duties. If you are asking me to leave because of what I feel—" "I am asking you to leave," he interrupted, "because of what you wrote, because of the position it places me in, because of the impropriety of a servant harboring such feelings for her employer." "You did not know," she said. "I never told you. I never acted on it. I never gave you any reason to doubt my conduct." "That is not the point." "Then what is the point?" she asked, and her voice rose for the first time, a crack in the wall she had built around herself. "That I loved you. That I loved you quietly, without expectation, without asking for anything in return. Is that a crime?" He flinched. She saw it, the smallest movement, the way his jaw tightened. "It is not appropriate," he said. "No," she agreed. "It is not appropriate. None of this is appropriate. Loving you was never appropriate. But I did not choose it. I did not wake up one morning and decide to give my heart to a man who would never see me." She stepped toward him, and for the first time in 6 years, she did not lower her eyes. "You asked me to leave," she said. "I will go, but before I do, I want you to hear this. I want you to know that someone loved you. Not for your title, not for your wealth, not for what you could give her. Someone loved you because she watched you, because she saw the man you are when you think no one is looking. She saw the grief you carry. She saw the kindness you try to hide. She saw the loneliness that lives in you like a wound that never healed." She paused. Her voice was shaking now, but she did not stop. "And she loved you anyway." He said nothing. He stood there, the letter still in his hand, his face unreadable. "Goodbye, Your Grace." She turned and walked out of the room. She told him everything, the love she carried in silence, the grief she saw in him, the loneliness he never let anyone touch. If that confession stirred something in you, subscribe to stay with this story as it unfolds, because hearts like his do not stay sealed forever. And tell us in the comments, have you ever loved someone who did not know they were loved? The door closed behind her with a soft click, and the sound of it seemed to echo through the whole empty house. She walked down the corridor, down the stairs, through the hall where the portraits watched her pass. She walked to her small room beneath the eaves, and she packed her things. She did not cry. She had spent 6 years learning not to cry. She would not break now. But as she folded her worn muslin gowns into her traveling bag, she thought of the roses she had chosen that morning, of the fire she had lit, of the tea she had prepared. She thought of all the small acts of love she had poured into this house, this life, this man who had never noticed. And she thought of the letter, the one she had written in a moment of weakness, the one that had betrayed her. She had not written it to confess. She had written it to survive, to pour the feelings out onto paper so they would not consume her from the inside. She had never meant for anyone to read it. But he had read it, and now everything was lost. She wondered, as she tied the strings of her bag, whether he would ever think of her again. Whether a day would come when he would walk into his study and notice that the fire was not burning, that the tea was not waiting, that the roses had stopped appearing on his desk. Whether he would ever realize that someone had loved him, truly and completely, and that she had taken that love with her when she left. She doubted it. Men like the Duke of Ashworth did not notice what they had until it was gone. And even then, she suspected, they did not truly understand. She descended the back stairs one last time. The kitchen was warm, the fire crackling, the cook already at work. She set her bag by the door and took a moment to look at the room that had been her home. "Miss Harrow," the cook said, looking up from her dough. "Are you unwell?" "I am leaving," Clara said. The cook's hands stilled. "Leaving? For how long?" "For good." The cook stared at her, flour dusting her apron, her mouth open in disbelief. "But, Miss, what happened? Did His Grace—" "It does not matter," Clara said. "I want you to know that I am grateful. For everything. For the kindness you have shown me. For the way you taught me to bake bread, to keep a house, to be strong." The cook's eyes filled with tears. "Miss Harrow, please, let me speak to him." "Do not," Clara said. "It will only make things worse." She picked up her bag and walked out the door. The air was cold. The sun had risen fully now, pale and thin, casting long shadows across the gravel drive. She did not look back at the house. She did not look at the windows, at the gardens, at the path she had walked 10,000 times. She simply walked forward, one step after another, until the gravel gave way to the road, and the road wound through the village, and the village disappeared behind her. She walked for 3 hours. The road was familiar. She had walked it once a year, when she visited her sister in the market town to the north. She had never imagined walking it with everything she owned in a single bag, with nowhere to go and no one waiting for her. Her sister would take her in. She knew that, but her sister had a husband and 3 children, and a house barely large enough for her own family. Clara would be a burden, an extra mouth to feed, a problem to solve. She had been a problem her whole life, it seemed. First her father's death, then her own presence at Ashworth Hall, then the feelings she had been foolish enough to write down. She was always someone else's difficulty to manage. She stopped walking when she reached the bridge that crossed the river. She leaned on the stone railing and looked down at the water, fast and grey, carrying leaves and twigs and debris toward the sea. She thought about how easy it would be to let go, to simply drop her bag and walk into the current and let the water carry her away. But she did not, because she was not the kind of woman who gave up. She had learned that from her father, who had worked until his hands bled to provide for her. She had learned it from the Duke, too, though he would never know. From watching him endure his grief, from seeing him rise every morning even when he did not want to, from learning that survival was not about happiness, but about stubbornness. She would survive this. She had survived worse. She picked up her bag and kept walking. The town appeared around mid-afternoon, a cluster of chimneys and rooftops against the grey sky. Clara knew the way to her sister's house, left at the church past the butcher's, down the narrow lane where the houses leaned toward each other like old friends sharing secrets. She knocked on the door. Her sister opened it. Margaret was 3 years older, rounder, softer, with flour on her apron and a baby on her hip. She looked at Clara, at the bag at her feet, at the exhaustion in her sister's eyes, and she did not ask questions. She simply opened the door wider and said, "Come in." Clara stepped inside. The house was warm. The fire was burning. The children were playing on the floor, the kettle was singing on the hob, and the smell of baking bread filled every corner. It was a small house, crowded and noisy, and nothing like the silent halls of Ashworth Hall. It felt like home. But home, Clara had learned, was not a place. It was a feeling. And the feeling she had carried for 6 years was not something she could leave behind, with her worn muslin gowns. She set down her bag and let her sister wrap her in an embrace that smelled of flour and soap and unconditional love. "Tell me everything," Margaret said. And Clara did. She told her about the letter, about the Duke's cold fury, about the way he had looked at her as though she were something unclean. She told her about the 6 years of silent love, the mornings she had risen before dawn, the evenings she had watched him from doorways and hoped he would look up. She told her about the roses and the tea and the lavender pressed into the seams of his chair. She told her about the way he had said her name, Miss Harrow, as though it were an accusation. Margaret listened without interrupting. She held her sister's hand and let the tears fall, and when Clara had finished, she did not offer advice or comfort or platitudes. She simply said, "He is a fool." Clara laughed, a broken sound. "He is a duke. He is entitled to his foolishness." "He is a man," Margaret said, "and men are fools by nature. But some of them learn. Some of them wake up." "I do not think he will wake up," Clara said. "I do not think he even knows he was asleep." Margaret squeezed her hand. "Then you are better off without him." Clara wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that she could walk away from Ashworth Hall and never look back, that she could build a new life here, in this small town, with her sister and her nieces and her nephew, and the quiet rhythm of ordinary days. But she knew, with a certainty that felt like grief, that she would never stop loving him. She would carry it with her always, and she would learn to live with it. The weeks passed. Clara found work at the local dressmaker's shop, a small establishment run by a widow named Mrs. Bellamy, who had lost her husband to a fever and had built a life from needle and thread. She taught Clara to sew, to measure, to drape fabric with precision. She taught her that a woman could be alone and still be whole. Clara was grateful for the work. It filled her hands and her hours, left less time for thinking, for remembering, for wondering whether the Duke had noticed her absence. She did not write to him. She did not ask anyone at Ashworth Hall how he was faring. She cut herself off from that world as cleanly as she had cut the thread from her last dress. But at night, when the work was done and the house was quiet, she lay awake and thought of him. She thought of the way he held his book, the small furrow between his brows when he was reading something that troubled him. She thought of the way he laughed, rare and low, a sound that seemed to surprise even him. She thought of the morning she had found him asleep in his chair, his face relaxed, his hand open on his chest, and she had stood in the doorway and watched him breathe. She had loved those moments. She had collected them like pressed flowers, fragile and precious and hidden away where no one could see. Now she had to learn to live without them, She was learning, but some lessons are harder than others. The summons came on a Thursday. Clara was at the shop, pinning a hem for a customer's gown, when a boy arrived with a letter. He was young, perhaps 12, with muddy boots and a cap pulled low over his eyes. He held out the envelope with fingers stained by ink. "For Miss Clara Harrow," he said. She took it. The seal was unfamiliar, a crest she did not recognize, a deep blue wax with a letter she could not decipher. "Who gave you this?" she asked. "A gentleman," the boy said. "He paid me to deliver it to the dressmaker's shop, said it was urgent." Clara opened the letter with hands that trembled. The handwriting was not one she knew. It was careful, precise, the hand of a man who had been taught to write by a tutor with exacting standards. The words were formal, measured, the language of duty and obligation, but the message was unlike anything she had ever read. "Dear Miss Harrow, I write to you with the deepest regret and the most profound shame. I have not slept since the day you left. I have not eaten. I have not been able to sit in my study without feeling the absence of your presence like a physical wound. I found your letter 6 months ago. I have read it every night since. I thought I understood it. I thought I understood you. I was wrong. I was wrong about everything. I did not know that you were the one who chose the roses. I did not know that you were the one who lit the fire. I did not know that you were the one who had pressed lavender into the seams of my chair. I did not know that you had loved me. I did not know that I had been loved at all. I have spent the past several weeks, since you left, discovering what you did for this house, for this estate, for me. I have spoken to the housekeeper, the cook, the stable master. I have learned that you mended my coats when I tore them, that you paid the household accounts when they were overdue, that you wrote letters to tenants who had fallen ill, that you remembered birthdays and anniversaries and the names of every child who lived on my land. I have learned that you were the heart of this house, and I was too blind to see it. I do not expect your forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But I am writing to tell you that I am coming to see you. I am writing to tell you that I will wait outside your sister's house until you agree to speak to me. I am writing to tell you that I will spend the rest of my life making amends, if you will allow me. I was wrong, Miss Harrow. I was wrong about you from the first moment, and I have been wrong every day since. You were never invisible. I was blind. If you will give me the chance, I would like to learn to see. Yours in the deepest regret and the most hopeful anticipation, Ashworth. Clara read the letter 3 times. The first time she did not believe it. The second time she felt the anger rise. The memory of his cold voice, his flat eyes, the way he had dismissed her as though she were nothing. The third time she reached the end and found herself crying. She did not know what to do. She folded the letter and placed it in her pocket. She finished pinning the hem. She thanked the customer and wished her a good day. She closed the shop at the usual hour and walked home in the dusk. Her sister was in the kitchen stirring a pot of stew. The children were playing on the floor. The fire was burning. "There is a man outside," Margaret said without looking up. "He has been waiting for 2 hours." Clara stood at the window and looked out. He was there, standing on the narrow street, his greatcoat dusted with rain, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked thinner than she remembered, older, more tired. He looked like a man who had not slept. She watched him for a long moment. She thought about the 6 years she had spent loving him in silence. She thought about the day she had left, the cold fury in his eyes, the door closing behind her. She thought about the letter in her pocket, the words he had written, the confession that sounded almost like a prayer. She did not know if she could forgive him. She did not know if she wanted to. But she knew, with a certainty that felt like hope, that she had to speak to him, because she had loved him for 6 years, because she had never stopped, and because the man standing in the rain waiting for her was not the same man who had sent her away. He was a man who had learned to see. She opened the door. He looked up when the door opened. The rain had darkened his coat, plastered his hair to his forehead, and the lines of his face seemed carved deeper than she remembered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The street was quiet, the lamp at the corner casting a pool of yellow light on the wet cobblestones. Clara stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, and she looked at him the way she had looked at him 1,000 times before, carefully, steadily, as though she were memorizing the sight of him. The rain fell in silence, and so did the space between them, a man who had learned to see, a woman learning to trust again. If this moment of waiting, of hope standing in the rain, has stirred something in you, subscribe so you do not miss the confession that follows. And in the comments tell me, he waited. If you have ever known the weight of someone standing still for you, not demanding, only hoping. Your Grace, she said. He flinched at the title. Clara, he said, and the sound of his voice using her given name sent a tremor through her that she could not hide. I did not know if you would come to the door. I almost did not, she said. He nodded as though he had expected that answer, as though it confirmed something he had already decided about himself. I have no right to ask for your time, he said. I have no right to stand here, but I could not stay away. She stepped out onto the threshold and closed the door behind her. The rain had softened to a drizzle, a fine mist that clung to her hair and her shoulders. She did not invite him inside. She did not offer him shelter. Tell me why, she said. Tell me why you came. He took a breath and she saw the effort it cost him. This was a man who had never had to explain himself, who had never needed to justify his choices or his feelings. He was learning now in the rain on a narrow street in a town that was not his own, and she could see how painfully he was learning. Because I did not understand what I had lost until it was gone, he said. Because I walked into my study the morning after you left and the fire was not lit. I waited for the tea that did not come. I looked at the corner of my desk where you always set the tray, and I could not breathe. He paused. I found a rose on the path outside. It had fallen from a bush near the kitchen door. I picked it up and I thought of you. I thought of all the roses I had never noticed, and I realized that I had never noticed anything. Clara did not speak. She let the silence settle, let the weight of his words sink into the space between them. The housekeeper told me, he continued, about the lavender. She told me that you had been pressing it into the seams of my chair for 3 years. She told me that you had learned it from your mother, that it was a remedy for sleeplessness. She told me that the chair had helped me rest, and I had never once asked why. I did not want you to ask, Clara said quietly. I did not want you to notice. I wanted to give you something you could accept without knowing it came from me. I know, he said. That is what breaks my heart. You loved me in secret because you believed I would not want your love if I knew it was yours. She looked away. I have spent the past weeks reading your letter, he said. I have read it until the paper is soft, until I know every word by heart. And the more I read, the more I realized that I had been looking at you for 6 years and never once seeing you. He stepped forward 1 step, and the rain fell harder. I saw you carry trays. I saw you straighten books. I saw you leave rooms when I entered them. I saw the shape of you, but I never saw the truth of you. I never saw the woman who rose before dawn to light my fire. I never saw the woman who chose roses because she knew I needed beauty, even when I did not know it myself. His voice broke. I never saw the woman who loved me. Clara pressed her lips together. The tears were there, waiting, but she held them back. I loved you for 6 years, she said. I loved you when you were grieving your wife. I loved you when you were cold and distant and impossible. I loved you when you forgot my name, when you walked past me without a glance, when I sat in my room at night and wondered if I existed at all. I am sorry, he whispered. I did not need your apology, she said. I needed you to see me. I needed you to know that I was there, that I was real, that I mattered. You mattered, he said, and his voice was fierce now. You matter. You have always mattered. I was too blind to see it, but I see it now. I see you, Clara. I see you. She closed her eyes. The words she had waited 6 years to hear, and now they cut as deeply as they healed. Your Grace, she said, I do not know if I can trust this. Then let me earn it, he said. Let me prove to you that this is not a whim, not guilt, not the desperation of a man who cannot bear to be alone. Let me show you that I am changed, that I will spend every day of the rest of my life learning to see the things I missed. She opened her eyes and looked at him. Do you know what I wanted? She asked. Not a title, not a fortune, not a grand gesture. I wanted you to look at me. I wanted you to see me when I walked into a room. I wanted you to remember my name. I will never forget it again, he said. She did not know if she believed him, but she saw the desperation in his eyes, the raw vulnerability of a man who had spent his entire life hiding from his feelings and had finally been forced to face them. "Come inside," she said. "You are soaked through." He followed her into the house. The kitchen was warm. Margaret had taken the children upstairs, and the fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Clara hung his coat by the fire and poured him a cup of tea without asking how he took it. He had always taken it black with 1 sugar. He noticed. He did not say anything, but she saw the way his eyes lingered on the cup, the way his hand trembled when he lifted it to his lips. "You remember," he said. "I remember everything," she said. The fire crackled. "I do not know what happens next," Clara said, sitting across from him. "I do not know if I can go back to Ashworth Hall. I do not know if I can be the woman who loves you in secret again." "You will not have to be," he said. "I am not asking you to return as a servant. I am asking you to return as—" He stopped. He set down his cup and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I am asking you to return as my wife." The words hung in the air, fragile and impossible. "Your Grace," she said, "you cannot mean that." "I have never meant anything more," he said. "I have spent 6 years being a fool. I have spent the past weeks learning what I have lost. I do not want to spend the rest of my life regretting that I did not ask you when I had the chance." "You are a duke," she said. "I am a servant. The world will not accept this." "Then the world can learn," he said. "I am not the man I was, Clara. I do not care what the world thinks. I care what you think. I care whether you will give me a chance." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the 6 years of silence, the mornings before dawn, the roses she had chosen. She thought about the letter she had written, the door that had closed behind her, the long walk to her sister's house. She thought about the man who had stood in the rain, waiting for her. "Ask me again," she said. He went still. "Ask me again," she repeated. "Tomorrow, when you have slept, when you have thought about what you are offering. Ask me again, and I will give you my answer." He rose from his chair and crossed to where she sat. He knelt before her, took her hand, and pressed it to his lips. "Then I will ask you again tomorrow," he said, "and the day after that, and the day after that, until you believe me." She did not pull her hand away, and for the first time in 6 years, she did not feel invisible. He stayed the night at the inn at the edge of town, and Clara did not sleep. She lay awake in the narrow bed in her sister's spare room, the letter from the Duke pressed against her chest, and she traced the words she had memorized. "You were never invisible, I was blind." She had wanted to hear those words for so long that she had stopped believing they would ever come, and now that they had, she did not know what to do with them. In the morning, she rose before dawn as she always had. She dressed in her best gown, the one she had saved for Sundays, a simple grey wool with white cuffs. She pinned her hair carefully, the way her mother had taught her. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the wash basin and saw a woman who had survived. She walked to the inn. He was waiting in the parlour, seated by the window, a cup of coffee untouched before him. He stood when she entered, and the sight of him, the way his eyes lit with hope and fear in equal measure, made her heart stumble. "Clara," he said, "Your Grace." "Please," he said, "call me Thomas." She had never heard his given name. She had never dared to imagine it. It felt strange on her tongue, intimate and forbidden, like a secret she was not yet ready to share. "Thomas," she said, and the word came out softer than she had intended. He closed his eyes for a moment, as though the sound of his name from her lips was something he had been starving for. "Have you eaten?" he asked. "I ordered breakfast. I did not know what you liked, so I asked for everything." She almost smiled. It was such a simple gesture, so unlike the Duke she had known, and it moved her more than any grand declaration could have. "I am not hungry," she said. "Then sit with me. Let me look at you." She sat across from him, and he did not look away. He studied her face as though he were memorizing it, as though he were afraid she would disappear if he blinked. "I asked you to give me an answer today," he said. "I do not mean to pressure you. If you need more time—" "I do not need more time," she said. I have had 6 years to think about this. He waited. I loved you when you were not worthy of it, she said. I loved you when you were cold and distant and blind. I loved you when you could not see me, when you did not know my name, when you dismissed me without a second thought. I loved you through all of it. I know, he said. I do not know if I can love you now, she said, and she saw the pain flicker across his face. I do not know if the woman who loved you so desperately is still inside me. She gave everything she had. She poured herself out in silence, and you never noticed. I do not know if she survived. He reached across the table and took her hand. Then let me help you find her, he said. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of the love she gave. I cannot bring back the years I wasted. I cannot undo the pain I caused. But I can promise you this. I will never look away from you again. I will never take you for granted. I will never let a day pass without telling you that I see you, that I cherish you, that I am grateful for every moment you choose to stay. She looked at his hand over hers. She looked at the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability he was offering her like a gift he was afraid she would refuse. I am afraid, she said. I am afraid too, he said. I am afraid that I have ruined everything. I am afraid that you will walk away, and I will spend the rest of my life knowing that I had the chance to love you, and I threw it away. But I am more afraid of not trying than I am of failing. She thought about the road she had walked, the bridge she had stopped at, the moment she had looked into the water, and wondered if it would be easier to let go. She thought about the sister who had opened her door without questions. She thought about the dressmaker who had taught her that a woman could be alone and still be whole. She thought about the man who had stood in the rain, waiting for her. She squeezed his hand. Then try, she said. Prove to me that you are the man you say you are. Not with words, with time, with patience, with the small things, the ones you never noticed before. I will, he said, his voice rough with emotion. She did not say she loved him. She did not say she would marry him. She said only what she could offer. A chance, a beginning, a door left open. And for him that was enough. He returned the next morning with a rose. It was not a grand bloom from his own gardens, but a single stem he had purchased from the flower seller at the market. The petals were deep red, almost crimson, and he held it out to her with the awkward formality of a man who had never given a flower to anyone before. I do not know if this is the right kind, he said. I asked the seller which one meant something. She said red was for love. I thought if I gave you the wrong color, you might think I did not understand. Clara took the rose. She looked at the way the light caught the velvet of the petals, the way the stem had been carefully stripped of thorns. It is the right color, she said. Relief softened his shoulders. He stayed at the inn for a week. Each morning, he appeared at the dressmaker's shop with something small, a ribbon, a spool of thread in the exact shade of her eyes, a book of poetry he had found in the town's only bookshop. Each offering was accompanied by awkwardness, by the humility of a man who had never learned to give gifts that could not be repaid. Mrs. Bellamy watched from behind her counter, her needle moving in and out of fabric, and said nothing. But Clara caught the small smile that tugged at the corner of the widow's mouth. He is persistent, Mrs. Bellamy said one afternoon, when the Duke had left, and Clara stood holding a length of pale blue silk he had brought for her. He is trying, Clara said. Trying is different from wanting, Mrs. Bellamy said. Any man can want. It takes a certain kind of man to try. On the 5th day, he asked her to walk with him. The rain had cleared, and the afternoon sun was pale but warm. He led her down the lane that ran along the river, past the willow trees whose branches trailed in the water. They walked in silence for a long while, and Clara found that she did not mind the quiet. It was different from the silences at Ashworth Hall. Those had been heavy with unspoken things, with grief and distance and walls he had built too high to climb. This silence was open. It was waiting. I have been thinking about the years I wasted, he said finally. Not the years after you left. Those I have accounted for. I mean the years before, when you were there and I did not see you. Clara kept her eyes on the path ahead. I have wondered how many moments I missed, How many times you looked at me and I looked through you. How many small kindnesses I accepted without gratitude, without acknowledgement, without even knowing they came from you." "You could not have known," Clara said. "I should have," he said. "I should have asked. I should have paid attention. I should have learned the names of the people who served me, the faces of the women who lit my fires and carried my tea. I was not too busy. I was not too burdened. I was simply too proud." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I do not want to be that man anymore," he said. "I do not want to be the Duke who walks through his own house without seeing it. I want to be the man who knows the names of the roses in his garden. I want to be the man who notices when the fire was lit by someone who rose before dawn." He took her hand. "I want to be the man who deserves you." Clara looked at him. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the desperation that he tried to hide, the hope he was afraid to name. "You are trying," she said. "That is more than I expected." "Is it enough?" he asked. She did not answer, not because she did not know, but because the answer was still forming, still settling into place like a puzzle she had been trying to solve for 6 years. "I do not know yet," she said, "but I am still here. I am still walking beside you. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything," he said. She had not yet returned to the shop when the letter arrived. A messenger on horseback, his coat dusty from travel, his horse lathered and breathing hard. He stopped at her sister's house and asked for Clara by name. Margaret took the letter with a frown and brought it to Clara, who was sitting in the garden, the Duke's rose in a glass jar on the table beside her. The seal was not one she recognized. She broke it carefully. The letter was from the housekeeper at Ashworth Hall. "Miss Harrow, I hope this letter finds you well. I write to you because I do not know who else to tell. His Grace has not been himself since you left." He dismissed the staff who had been with him for years, one by one, and replaced them with new faces. "He says he wants to start fresh, but I think he is punishing himself. He spends his evenings in the study, reading the same letter over and over. I have seen him hold it to his chest, heard him speak your name when he thinks no one is listening. The house is cold without you. The roses have stopped appearing, and I find myself looking at the desk where you always set the tray, expecting to see you there. He is lost, Miss Harrow. I thought you should know." Yours faithfully, Mrs. Hargrove Clara, read the letter twice. She folded it and placed it in her pocket, next to the Duke's own letter. Margaret found her there an hour later, still sitting, the rose beginning to wilt in its jar. "What will you do?" Margaret asked. Clara looked at the horizon. The sun was setting, casting the sky in shades of gold and rose, and she thought about the house she had left behind. She thought about the study, the fire that had gone unlit, the chair no one had pressed lavender into. She thought about the man who had stood in the rain. "I do not know yet," she said, "but I think I am beginning to." The days turned into weeks. The Duke did not leave. He rented a small room at the inn and wrote letters to his estate manager, conducting his business from a desk that wobbled and a chair that creaked. The townspeople watched him with curiosity, a duke in their midst, eating at the common table, nodding to the baker, asking the names of children he passed on the street. They had never seen a nobleman behave this way, and they did not know what to make of it. Clara watched him too. She watched the way he struggled to be ordinary, the way he fumbled with coins at the market, the way he accepted correction from Mrs. Bellamy when he interrupted too often. He was learning. She could see it in the small things, the way he now held the door for her, the way he remembered to ask about her day, the way he noticed when she was tired. "You are teaching an old dog new tricks," Margaret said one evening, watching the Duke help Clara carry bolts of fabric from the shop to the house. "He is not old," Clara said. "He is a duke," Margaret said. "That is older than old when it comes to learning humility." But she was smiling. It happened on a Sunday. Clara had gone to the church alone, as she usually did, sitting in the back pew where the light from the stained glass fell on her hands. She did not know that he had followed her until the service ended, and she turned to find him standing at the back of the church, his hat in his hands, waiting. He waited at the back of the church, hat in hand, a duke stripped of everything but hope. And in that silence something in you shifted too. If you want to stay with them through every word of that letter, every confession still to come, Subscribe so you do not miss the moment it all breaks open. Tell me in the comments, what do you think Clara will say next? Is she ready to let him back in, or does she need him to prove himself still? I did not want to intrude, he said. But I thought perhaps I could walk you home. They stepped out into the pale autumn sunlight, and the village square was quiet. The leaves were turning, gold and red and brown, and the air smelled of wood smoke and earth. I received a letter from Mrs. Hargrove, Clara said. He went still. She said the house is cold without me. He did not answer. She said you have been reading my letter every night. I have, he said. She said you dismissed half the staff. I wanted to start fresh, he said. I wanted to make the house ready for... He stopped. I wanted to make it a place you could return to without feeling the weight of the past. Clara walked in silence for a few steps. I've been thinking about what it would mean to return, she said. He did not dare to breathe. I have been thinking about what it would mean to trust you again, to believe that the man you are now is the man you will stay. I will stay, he said. I know you believe that, Clara said, but belief is not the same as certainty. And certainty takes time. Then take all the time you need. She stopped walking and turned to face him. I do not need more time, she said. I need a promise. Anything. I need you to promise me that you will never again let me disappear into the background of your life, that you will see me, that when I speak, you will listen, that when I am quiet, you will ask why. He took her hands. I promise, he said. I promise with everything I am. I will spend the rest of my life learning to see you, to hear you, to hold you in the center of my world where you have always belonged. She looked at him for a long moment. Then I will come back, she said, but not as a servant. No, he agreed. Never as a servant. She did not say she would marry him. Not yet. But she walked back toward Ashworth Hall beside him, their hands intertwined, and for the first time in 6 years, she did not feel like a woman who was waiting to be seen. She felt like a woman who had finally been found. The journey back to Ashworth Hall took the better part of a day, and Clara felt every mile of it like a thread being rewoven into a fabric she had thought torn beyond repair. They travelled in his carriage, though she had offered to walk. He had refused with a gentleness that surprised her, saying that she had walked far enough already. They sat across from each other as the countryside rolled past, and the silence between them was no longer heavy with unspoken grief. It was the silence of two people learning to exist in the same space without walls. She watched the hedgerows give way to open fields, the familiar landmarks of the estate appearing one by one. The old oak tree where she had sat as a girl, reading books her father had given her. The stone bridge where she had stopped on the day she left, the day she had looked into the water and chosen to keep walking. The gate to the estate, iron and imposing, which had once felt like the entrance to a prison she had chosen for herself. It looked different now. The gate was open. The carriage rolled to a stop before the main entrance, and Clara stepped down before he could offer his hand. She stood in the gravel drive and looked at the house that had been her home for 6 years. The windows caught the afternoon light, and for a moment she saw herself reflected in them, not as a servant at the edge of a frame, but as a woman standing at the center of her own life. He came to stand beside her. I have asked Mrs. Hargrove to prepare the rooms at the east end of the house, he said. They are not the servants' quarters. I thought you might want a place that did not carry the weight of the past. She turned to look at him. You have thought of everything, she said. I have thought of nothing else, he admitted. For weeks, I have thought of nothing but how to make this house into a place where you could be happy. She did not answer. She walked toward the door, and he followed. The interior of Ashworth Hall had changed. The corridors were lighter. He had opened curtains that had been drawn for years, had placed fresh flowers in the hallways, had replaced the dark, heavy portraits of stern ancestors with landscapes and scenes from the gardens. The house no longer felt like a monument to grief. It felt like a place that was learning to live again. Mrs. Hargrove met them in the entrance hall, her eyes bright with tears she did not try to hide. Miss Harrow, she said, welcome home. Clara felt the words settle into her chest. Home. She had not thought of this place as home in a long time, but standing in the entrance hall, with the light pouring through the windows and Mrs. Hargrove's hand reaching for hers, she began to believe that it could be. "Thank you," Clara said. "Thank you for your letter." Mrs. Hargrove squeezed her hand and said nothing. The weeks that followed were not easy. Clara did not move into the east wing. She took a room on the main floor, one that had once been used by guests, and she filled it with her own small belongings, a worn copy of her father's favorite book, the rose the Duke had given her, pressed and dried and framed, the letters he had written tied with a ribbon and kept in a drawer. She did not assume the role of lady of the house. She was not ready. Instead, she worked beside Mrs. Hargrove, learning the rhythms of the household from the inside, not as a servant who obeyed orders, but as a woman who chose to be there. The Duke watched her. He did not push, did not demand, did not remind her of the promise she had not yet made. He simply stayed present, offering small kindnesses that she could accept or refuse without explanation. He left a book of poetry on her desk, open to a page about the patience of love. He had the gardener plant roses outside her window, not the formal, ordered rose of the estate's main garden, but a wild tangle of climbers that would bloom in shades of pink and crimson and white. He learned her favorite color, blue, her preferred hour of the day, dawn, her habit of humming when she was content. He learned her. And slowly, word by word, gesture by gesture, Clara began to trust that the man who had changed was not a stranger wearing the Duke's face, but the same man she had loved all along, finally awakened, finally willing to see. It was autumn when he asked her again. The leaves had turned and the garden was a carpet of gold and red. They walked together along the path where she had once walked alone, where she had gathered roses before the sun was fully risen. He stopped at the bench beneath the old oak tree, the one where she had sometimes sat during her rare moments of rest. "Clara," he said, and his voice was steady, though she could see the tension in his shoulders. "I have waited. I have tried to be patient. I have tried to give you the time you needed, without pressure, without expectation." "You have," she said. "But I cannot wait forever," he said. "Not because I am impatient, but because I know what I want. And I need to know if there is hope that you want it too." She sat on the bench. He sat beside her. "I have spent the past months learning who you are," he said. "Not the woman who served me tea, not the woman who lit my fires, but the woman who reads poetry in the morning, who hums when she is happy, who presses dried flowers between the pages of books. I have learned that you are kind without weakness, strong without cruelty, patient without submission. I have learned that you are the most remarkable woman I have ever known." He took a breath. "And I have learned that I love you, not because I owe you, not because I am grateful, not because I am trying to make amends. I love you because I cannot help it. I love you because you are the first thing I think of when I wake and the last thing I see before I sleep. I love you because you have taught me what it means to live." Clara looked at her hands. They were still resting in her lap, and she thought about all the years she had spent hoping to hear these words. "I loved you for 6 years," she said. "I loved you when you could not love me back. I loved you when it hurt, when it cost me everything, when I had to leave to save the part of myself that still believed in hope." "I know," he said. "I thought that love would be enough," she continued. "I thought that if I loved you enough, you would eventually see me, but that is not how love works. Love does not force itself to be seen. It waits. It hopes. It endures." She looked up at him. "You have learned to see me," she said. "You have shown me that the man I loved was worth loving, and I have learned that I do not have to disappear to be loved in return." He took her hand. "Clara Harrow," he said, "will you marry me?" She looked at him, at the man who had once been too blind to see the roses on his own desk, the man who had stood in the rain and waited, the man who had learned to change because he could not bear to lose her. "Yes," she said, "I will." He kissed her then, not in the grand dramatic way of novels and ballads, but softly, reverently, as though he were afraid she might vanish if he held her too tightly. She did not vanish. She stayed, her hand in his, her heart finally at rest. They married in the village church on a morning in late October. The leaves had fallen, and the air was crisp and clear. Clara wore a gown of deep blue velvet. The color he had learned was her favorite, and she carried a bouquet of roses from the vines he had planted beneath her window. Mrs. Hargrove cried. Margaret held her children close and smiled. And the Duke, Thomas, looked at his bride with eyes that no longer looked through her, but saw her, fully and completely, as she had always deserved to be seen. She did not return to her small room beneath the eaves. She moved into the chambers that had been prepared for her, the ones at the east end of the house, where the morning light poured through the windows and the scent of roses drifted up from the garden. She did not become a woman who commanded servants or presided over dinner parties. She became something far more important. She became herself. And every morning when she descended the stairs, she found a single rose on the tray beside the tea, a rose he had chosen himself before dawn because he had learned that small things were the only things that truly mattered. She never had to ask why. She knew, and she stayed.